channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. So I often get comments from you guys saying that you're getting mice in the next few weeks or months and you don't know what to do or what to expect or how to act when you bring them home. So hopefully this video today will help you with all of that. So whether this is going to be your first ever time bringing mice home, or you already have mice and you're thinking of adding some more to your family, I wanted to make this video today to talk you guys through what to do to prepare for them, what to do on the actual day, and what to do once you've brought them home. If by some chance you've clicked on this video and you have no interest in mice at all and you're actually getting rats, I have a whole separate video on bringing rats home and what to expect and what to do. A lot of these tips I'm going to mention in this video can also apply to rats as well, but I have made a whole separate one for rats. I'll leave that linked in the iCards and also down in the description, and you guys can feel free to go and watch that one instead. So let's talk about what to do before you bring them home. With any animal that you're getting, it is really important to make sure you're prepared. Make sure you have everything lined up ready for them when they come home to make it the least stressful experience possible. So obviously the first thing you are going to want to do is set up the cage, whether this is going to be their permanent cage or just a temporary one they live in until they can meet your current mice. Just like the temporary cage that I use is this Exoterra, which is right up above me, that you can't see but I will insert a clip of it. You are going to want to set up this cage and make sure it is all ready for your new mice to come home. Preferably, and if you do have the option to, I do recommend keeping them in a separate room and a separate airspace to any other small animals you have, just to make sure they don't have anything transferable they could pass on to your current animals. Obviously if you only have these mice that you're getting, then you don't have to worry about this. If you do have other rats and mice, you do want to quarantine them if possible, just to make sure they don't pass on any other illnesses, and obviously your current animals don't pass anything on to them too. So quarantining new mice is really recommended if you're able to, in a separate room and a separate airspace to any other small animals you have already. So when you set up this new cage for them, you are going to want to make sure it has everything they need. Whether this is their temporary cage or a permanent cage, you want to make sure it has everything in there to make them comfortable. So obviously you're going to have to put in some of the bedding that you plan on using with your mice, and also some nesting material to make sure they are comfortable. And you want to make sure you provide plenty of places for them to sleep in and hide in, because obviously when you bring them home they are going to be scared in this new environment, and you want to make sure they have plenty of places to hide in just to make sure they are comfortable. And of course you are going to want to provide everything else for them too, like toys, wheels, water sources, everything like that you are going to want to include in their cage, whether it is permanent or temporary. I definitely recommend having the whole cage set up before you bring your mice home, just to make sure as soon as you do get them home they can go straight into that cage and begin settling in, and it just makes the whole process for them a lot less stressful. Also, before you bring them home, you are going to want to make sure you have some sort of carry cage to bring them home in. Wherever you get your mice from is probably not going to provide anything for you to take them home in. Not that I recommend getting mice from a pet store, or any animals for that matter, but sometimes pet stores do supply them in like cardboard boxes. I don't recommend just relying on these because they can chew their way out and escape in the car on the way home. So I do recommend wherever you're getting your mice from, whether it's a rescue, a breeder, or a pet store if you are going down that route, I do recommend making sure you have your own carry cage just to make sure you have something to bring them home in. So whether you have a store-bought carry cage or one that you've made like I have, you are going to also want to make sure that this is set up beforehand too. So you are going to want to put some of the bedding that you plan on using with your mice in the bottom of the carry cage, and preferably some nesting material for them too. They will really enjoy hiding in this on the way home. And it's also a really good idea to make sure they have something to hide in, because even in a carry cage they can feel quite open and exposed. So whether this is just a toilet roll or one of the houses you intend to use with your mice, it's also a good idea to put these in the carry cage too. As well as that, especially if you have a very long journey on the way home, you can provide them with a small bit of food that you intend to feed them. And it's also a really good idea to provide them with some sort of water source, whether this is a water bottle you're able to somehow attach to the carry cage, or instead of that you can also use like a piece of cucumber, some sort of watery fruit or vegetable that will provide them with some water and hydration on the way home, especially if you have a super long journey. So on the day of picking up your mice, this is like the most exciting day ever. Obviously make sure you have the carrier with you and take that to wherever you're picking your mice up from. Most breeders and rescues where you get your mice from will be really helpful, and you can also ask them to provide you with some bedding that the mice have already used to put in the carry cage and then eventually into their new cage. This will just help them transition over to their new environment, because this bedding will smell like them and just help them feel a bit more comfortable in their new home. Some breeders again will be super helpful and provide you with a small bit of food that the mice are already being fed on. I know with my 3 girls, when I got them from a breeder, she did give me a small bag of their current food to mix in with the food that I intended to feed them, and this was super helpful in them not getting an upset stomach, because if you do quickly switch them over to a food they're not used to, sometimes this can upset their stomach. So it's worth asking the breeder if they can do that for you, just to mix this in with the food that you intend to use, and this just helps transition your mice over to that food instead. So once you've got your mice and you've picked them up from the breeder or the rescue or wherever you're getting your mice from, it is really important to make sure you get home as quickly as possible so your mice can settle in. If you want to go through the McDonald's drive-thru quickly, you can do that, but I do recommend not making too many stops on the way home and just getting your mice back into their new home as quickly as you can. Speaking of bringing them home, please don't be tempted to open the carry cage or whatever you have them in the car. This can go very wrong, especially if you're not used to your mice yet and used to their behaviours. If they jump out and get loose in the car, you're going to have a very hard time catching them and getting them back in the carry cage. So although it's tempting to interact with them as soon as you get them, just leave them alone. Don't open the carry cage unless you absolutely have to, because they might escape. So leave the carry cage shut, make it as calm as possible. Don't play like any loud music in the car or anything like that, and make sure your car is also temperature controlled, so not too hot or not too cold on the journey home. So what should you do once you get home? Once you get home, you are going to want to try and get them in their cage as quickly as possible. Depending on where you get them from and how tame they already are, this might be a bit of a struggle getting them from the carrier into their new cage. And if they are a bit skittish, I don't recommend trying to handle them at this point. One thing I do that is really helpful is I get a toilet roll and kind of like coax them into the toilet roll and then use that to transport them into their new home. This is just a really helpful way of quickly getting them into their new cage without stressing them out too much trying to handle them initially, especially if they're not used to that yet. So obviously the whole aim with this is to make this whole process as stress-free as possible. If you do live in quite a busy home, you are going to want to make sure the mice are somewhere quiet and away from other pets like cats, dogs or small children that may potentially bother them in those first initial days of getting used to their new home. You want to make sure they are in a room that's going to be quiet and allow them to adjust to the new environment. So I know it's super exciting when you bring a new animal home, you just want to watch it and you want to interact with it, and it can be really hard to just leave them alone, but sometimes this is what's necessary to make sure they are settling in. I know when you get them home you might want to handle them straight away and just play with them, but it is really important, especially with a prey species, to give them that adjustment period to settle in. So I do recommend at least giving them overnight before you start messing with them or interacting with them. Obviously some mice are going to be different and some mice will need a lot longer than this to settle in, but generally I would say even with mice from a breeder that are super confident, I would still give them that overnight period just to settle in and get used to their new home. So the next day or the next few days you can start interacting with them and trying to start the bonding process. Obviously each mouse is going to be different and some mice may need a bit longer than others, so take it as slowly as you need to. Also, please do not be discouraged if your mice are afraid of you. Initially they are going to be a bit unsure. Even the most confident mice from breeders will act differently in a new environment, and they are a prey species, so this is natural for them to be a bit hesitant and a bit scared of you, so please don't be discouraged by this. I know you want your new pets to love you straight away, but sometimes some mice can take a bit of time to get used to you. So even if you did get mice from a breeder and they were really confident and friendly with the breeder or with you at the breeder's house, they can drastically change their behaviour in a new environment because they are scared and they're not used to all of the smells and the sights and the sounds. So even the most confident mouse can revert back to being a bit scared in a new environment, and it does take time to build that trust. So please don't give up on them on the first couple of days. Give them time to settle in and slowly work on bonding with them. I do have a whole separate video talking more in depth about how to tame your mice. I will leave that linked in the iCards and also down in the description. But in those first initial few days, you just want to sit quietly next to the cage and quietly talk to them to get them used to you and the sound of your voice, and just go about your daily routine, and they will gradually start to get used to that and start to get used to you being in the room with them. And if they do show interest in you, if they are very curious and coming up to the front of the cage, feel free to put your hand in for them to interact with and try to start that bonding process. If your mice are looking like they're interested in you and they're not just cowering in a little house and being scared, you can start that initial bonding process with them. do get a few people not knowing what to expect when they bring new mice home, or they are disappointed that their new mice aren't what they expected when they got them, and they're disappointed that they're not tamed straight away, or they're scared because they are biting them when they go to pick them up. These are all things you have to work through and gradually build your mouse's trust. They're not going to happen overnight, but I did just want to talk through some of the things to expect in the first few days or weeks of bringing your mice home. So the first thing to expect is that some mice may nip you, and I'm not saying this to scare you off or scare you away from getting mice, because it doesn't hurt, it's not an aggressive nip. If they're not breaking the skin or making you bleed, then this is not their intention at all. If you put your hand in and you're trying to tame your mice and they come over and nip you, please don't be discouraged by this. This is just their way of navigating the world and finding out more information about you. Rats and mice will test bite you just to find out who you are and what you're doing in their space. This is nothing to be scared of, and my mice are fighting. None of my mice do this anymore, but they did all do it when I was first trying to bond with them, so please don't let this discourage you from trying to interact with them and starting that taming process. It doesn't really hurt and they should grow out of it eventually. So something else to expect is that your new mice are not going to love you straight away. Obviously you may get the rare mouse from a breeder that is super confident and not fazed at all by being in a new environment, but most mice will be very timid to start with, unless of course you are having those very confident mice from a breeder, but most mice, it is in their nature to be very wary of new people, new environments that could potentially be a predator to them, so take it slow and make sure you put in the time and effort to build that trust with them, because most likely they're not going to love you straight away. So having had your new mice for a few days or a week, you may notice that they are sneezing slightly and you may be very worried that this could be an infection. So when you bring your new mice home and into a new environment, sometimes due to the stress they can start displaying some of these symptoms, and this can also be due to their environment. Obviously it is very different to the one they grew up in, the air quality can be different, or you can be using a different bedding. All of these things can make your mice a bit sneezy. So most of the time in the first few days or a week after bringing your mice home, if they are displaying very minor symptoms, then I would put this down to being new home sniffles, but if the symptoms get worse or they have had them for more than 2 weeks and it's been a while since you brought them home, then I would say this could possibly be an infection, a respiratory infection, and at this point you will want to take them to a vet and get them some antibiotics just to make sure it clears up. So to sum this video up, I would say when bringing home new mice, you do have to focus on the 2 P's, preparation and patience. So when you bring your new mice home, it is really important to make sure you are prepared, make sure you've done all your research and you have all the things you do need for them, and it also is really important to make sure you're patient, because trust does not happen overnight, and it is really important to keep working on that bond with your mice. And if you put the work in and you are dedicated and patient with them, I do believe you can have a very good bond with your mice. So if you have just brought new mice home or you are bringing them home in the next few weeks, congratulations, you are going to love them so much. I just find it so rewarding with my mice, getting them to trust me over a period of time, and I've been completely hooked ever since I had my first mouse. So I hope this video was helpful to you and I hope you enjoy your new mice. Please make sure you are subscribed to see any more animal content from me, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!